My support for this bill is predicated not only on the soundness of its principles, but in meeting local families distressed by painful and chronic conditions. I have been granted a personal window on an anguished existence, where access to safe, legal and reliable supply of medical cannabis would bring enormous relief. The sooner a robust legislative and regulatory process can be put in place, the better. And this, the Narcotic Drug Amendment Bill 2016, will achieve that. For the first time, creating a nationally consistent licensing scheme regulating the control, cultivation of cannabis for medical or scientific purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, the cultivation of cannabis is not currently authorised and regulated under the Narcotic Drugs Act 1967. But this bill is about common sense and balance, reconciling the right to patient access with an undiminished commitment to community protection and Australia's international obligations under the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs 1961. The bill allows for a legal supply of cannabis to be incorporated in safe and quality-assessed medical cannabis products. Patients will no longer have to turn to the black market as a means of mitigating their suffering and that of those who they love and care for, predominantly their family. The new laws will enshrine appropriate medical supervision around the use of these products, and when they are assessed in accordance with the Therapeutics Good Act 1989 and relevant state and territory law, patients won't be exposed to criminal prosecution or the health risk associated with materials of unknown safety and quality. Indeed, in straddling many sensitivities, these laws have demanded the stamp of consistency. The Commonwealth will control all regulatory aspects of the cultivation of medical cannabis through one national scheme, removing the capacity for states and territories to implement legislation to set up individual cultivation schemes. The result will be strong, consistent regulation right across the nation. In allowing the government to closely track the development of cannabis products for medical use from cultivation to supply, a national regulator will also curtail any attempts by criminals to become involved. This is no accidental bill. We are here today because the overwhelming voice of our collective community, supported, I'm very happy to say, by bipartisan political leadership, has made it so. The last thing seriously ill patients or those plagued by chronic conditions need to contend with is an acute brush with the law. It is a real concern when desperately unwell people are forced to turn plain, desperate, assessing unsafe, illegal supplies of cannabis and in so doing exposing themselves to both health risk and potential prosecution. At the same time, this government has the greatest compassion for these very same Australians and want to ensure they are afforded access to the most effective medical treatments. To address this, the government is allowing for domestic cultivation and manufacture, and I have no doubt that if passed, the legislation will see a reduction in the suffering of so many Australians, wherever their doctors determine medical cannabis is to be a potential benefit. There are provisions relating to the production and distribution of medical cannabis dating back to the Narcotics Drug Act 1967 and the Therapeutic Goods Act 1989. Authorised prescribers include specialists working with particular patient groups and clinical trials run by research institutions and state and territory governments. However, these historic statutes are out of step with best practice, contemporary regulation. And the fact remains that Australia does not have a safe, legal and reliable supply of locally grown cannabis to satisfy the community expectation that it could and would provide relief for some patients, including those with terminal cancer, multiple sclerosis and children with intractable forms of epilepsy. What we are talking about here is a ready source of medical cannabis products that doctors may prescribe if appropriate. This legislation, which has been described as the missing piece to patient access, establishes a licensing scheme for safe cultivation in Australia in complete accordance with Australia's international and domestic interests, including minimising the risk of diversion into illicit use. The obligations on Australia under the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs 1961 are to control the cultivation, distribution and use of cannabis in a manner consistent with the legal uses provided for within the Single Convention. As well, the introduction of a rigorous, fit-for-proper persons test in the bill is squarely aimed at shutting out organised crime elements, protecting public health and preventing the risk of diversion and profiteering from the black market. Australia must also report regularly to International Narcotics Control Board, which oversees the implementation of the Single Convention on the quantities of narcotics produced, manufactured and used in order to prevent stockpiling of raw material beyond national and global needs. To be clear, the bill amends the manufacturing provisions under the Narcotic Drugs Act 1967 to ensure the integrity and security of the scheme, such as through introduction of the fit and proper person test for applicants for a manufacturing licence, to update enforcement and penalty provisions to be consistent with modern regulatory practice, and to require applicants for a manufacturing licence for medical cannabis products to demonstrate a lawful supply pathway to patients, such as through a specific clinical trial or other supply that is permitted under the provisions of the Therapeutics Goods Act 1989, such as the Authorised Prescriber Scheme. Importantly, the bill does not override state and territory legislation dealing with criminal activities associated with the cultivation and trafficking of cannabis that occurs outside the regulatory scheme established by the amendments. This is a hugely significant moment for Australia and the many patients, families and advocates who have fought loudly and relentlessly to demystify and destigmatise medical cannabis products. The Turnbull government has worked closely with the states and territories, law enforcement agencies and other stakeholders over a long period to ensure the efficacy and robustness of the bill. After years of minefields and roadblocks, we now have the opportunity to secure a smooth legislative passage for these new laws. It is our chance to make a real difference in the lives of many Australians and their loved ones. We must do it, and for those reasons I commend this bill to the House.